Okay, good afternoon. Sorry for the delay. Okay, my name is Mike Kraus. I'm a Planning Rules Manager here at the South Coast Air Quality Management District. Okay, so you are at the public workshop for Proposed Rule 1180. That's refinery fence line and community air monitoring. So hopefully you're all here for that. I recognize all your faces participating in the working groups, which we really appreciate. But again, this is our official public workshop for the rule. Let's go through some little quick housekeeping. Phones, let's get these on vibrate and stuff. I know earlier my mother just texted me, oh, you're talking. Oh, I shouldn't text you then. Then she keeps texting me. I mean, okay, so put those on vibrate. If you do need to take your calls, feel free to leave the auditorium. No offenses are taken. Restrooms are down the hallway. In case of emergencies, evacuate, of course, out the exits. In case we need to shelter in place, like for an earthquake, they always say, drop to the floor, grab your chair, awkward things like that. I'm not quite sure that it helps, but good luck to all. Okay, and with regards to the workshop process, I'm going to go ahead and give a presentation, staff presentation. Afterwards, everyone's invited to come up and speak from the dais to us. We'll field questions here the best we can at our table back here to go through that process. We've also webcast this particular workshop. And so therefore, anybody who's out there webcasting, we do have an email address if you'd like to submit. There you go. Thank you, Paul. One step ahead of me. If you'd like to submit any questions to staff, Angela will field those questions to us, and then we can respond back on the webcast. So we'll put that up periodically, hopefully, if I remember, so you guys can, again, send email questions. You can also send email questions if you're shy sitting in the audience. I mean, it's modern day. Okay, let's see. So why don't we start off with the introduction to the panel. Again, my name is Mike Kraus. Let's just start with Payam.
I'm Payam Parkbin, Air Quality Specialist at SCAQMD.
Kevin Durkee, Senior Meteorologist.
Dan Garcia, Program Supervisor.
Vera Tiagi from the General Counsel's Office.
Barbara Radline, Program Supervisor, CEQA.
Great. Okay, Paul, let's show that email address one more time since we know we have 25 slides. So hopefully everyone here in the audience is signed in or left a card. And again, there's copies of the presentation in the back. Okay. Start us out here. All right, so this particular rule, hasn't really been done in a vacuum. This was something that I think has had a very, active interest across the board. And what I mean by that is, like, for example, we have a lot of communities out there that are quite interested in knowing what they're breathing and what is impacting their lives. And so when it comes, and it's not just the subject at hand, of course, of refineries. I mean, there's all sorts of sources out there, and that again, there's a heightened interest in that. But when it comes to the refineries, there's an interest in learning what is being possibly emitted into their communities, and I think vice versa when it comes to the refineries, because sometimes they may get the brunt of hey, what's that smell, or what's that potential emission, et cetera. And I think this is an exercise by which both those areas can learn from. As we know from a refinery operation, refineries do process crude oil into various products, and there are potential emissions with those kinds of operations. Now, back in 2015, EPA did adopt a rule requiring a fence line monitoring. This was focused at petroleum refineries on benzene emissions, and their basic requirement was what they call a passive monitor. However, in 2016, Bay Area then adopted a rule which required fence line monitoring at refineries, but this time they used this open path air monitors. So one is more of your sort of fixed stationary monitor, sort of very traditional, and the open path is a little bit more modern, and we're going to have a picture of that in a little bit here. So to kind of show you what kind of advantages that open path system may have. But there's also some legislation that's been going on up in Sacramento, AB 617, as we're all could be familiar with, passed. And what that's going to do is that's going to require the state to identify what they call high priority locations. And these are locations by which the Assembly bill is requiring a community monitor to be established. And they would then put the burden then on the air districts to actually establish those. And the deadlines for all of this, by the way, are really tight. The state has to come up with this plan by October 1st next year. And then the following July in 2019, we're required to actually have those systems deployed. Also on the state level, by Al Marsucci, Assemblyman Al Marsucci down in the Torrance area, he's proposed, and it's gone a kind of a long way, Assembly Bill 1647. And this particular bill is requiring both the community and fence line monitors to be installed in and around the refineries by January 1st, 2020. Now, while this is proposed, this has also made it through the House and through the Senate. It's already got a third reading with some amendments, which they then go back to a second reading, and there's this little loop that it goes on up in Sacramento, if you're familiar with that, but it's gone quite far along. So we'll be seeing what kind of progress that eventually makes. So this rule to us then is really in support of these recent requirements, legislation, and of course, interest. So, but an overarching theme, as you know, from that we've been hearing from the working group, is try to avoid that duplicity, try to avoid any of these pieces to be in conflict. Okay, so petroleum refineries, they are one of the largest sources of stationary, they are the largest emitters of stationary source emissions, as well as toxic air contaminants in our basin. So, of course, there's an interest in those types of operations. There can be upset conditions, of course, like with any operation. And then, of course, there's potential then to release for things like criteria air pollutants, VOCs, metals, other compounds, et cetera. So we really felt that there was a need, and there's technology out there now for this, for real-time continuously air monitoring. And of course, that is some of the interest of both the legislative end as well as the community. We also think that this is important because it doesn't just address these issues of the community, but also there's great efforts taken, I believe, by the refinery operators themselves in order to detect leaks and in order to quickly correct those emissions. So this public process that we've been going through overall in addressing this monitoring system has been going through 4 working groups and the public workshop today. And I think we've been getting, each time we have like a working group, we take in the feedback. As you might have been seeing, we've been changing and evolving the rule along the way. So let's kind of walk through the rule a little bit here in case anybody who hasn't been involved. So again, the purpose of this is to require fence line and community air monitoring systems to provide continuous air quality information to the public about air pollutant levels at or near the boundaries of the refineries and in those neighboring communities. Right now, the applicability is written, the copy of the rule you might have is written that it sort of kind of is looking at a capacity level for those that would be subject to the rule or not. And that level right now is at 10,000 barrels per day of crude oil. However, there's been some recent discussions about this, on whether this captures some refineries that wasn't really the intent. What I mean is that when you actually look at the definition of a petroleum refinery, it's a lot of different processes that kind of falls under that definition. And so one of the types of refineries could involve asphalt processing, and that really isn't what the key of what the monitoring systems were really trying to address. And we thought we had kind of covered it with that 10,000, but it looks like there is a facility that might be, at least on a permitted level, be up a lot higher. They may not be active in that, but on a permitted level, they'd be up a lot higher. And again, not wanting to capture that, we may modify that applicability level, which then would affect that next bullet point about affected sources. That would move then from 8 currently down to 7. Okay. As with most of our rules, we have a series of definitions. This one kind of, thank you. This one has very few definitions, which is not a bad thing. Of course, defining then what we would consider a community system or a fence line system, what's a petroleum refinery, what do we mean by when we say real time, and then also our guidelines. So the overview of the community air monitoring. So, our thinking here is, and we've got some cool pictures here. We're thinking about a combination of equipment that measures and records a series of air pollutant concentrations in the communities near the refinery, and we'll list those out in a second. Similarly, for the fence line monitor, it's a little kind of different system. Now, like we talked about the passive systems, that's sort of, again, your more traditional one in a fixed location. However, this open path, what it does is, as you can see here, it sort of sends a little laser stream around the boundaries, and that enables to capture not just more pollutants, but almost all the pollutants, as long as you've sort of measured that correctly in a certain height and what have you, when you're designing the whole system. And so this is kind of something that we're recommending in order to ensure the best results. So when you look at the plan, basically what we're doing here is we're going to be requiring that a plan be submitted no later than 1 year after the date of adoption. The plan will be prepared by the refinery operators and their staff and crew. And there's going to be a series of things that we would want to see in those plans, and we're going to look at that in a second. Then the next process would be we would review that plan, and we would come up with our feedback on what we think of the plan and work with the refinery on how that plan should eventually be approved. Once that plan is approved, then there's a 1-year time frame to install and then operate that Fenceline and community air monitoring system. So when we're thinking about the plan, we got to kind of break it out, right? So we look at a fence line monitoring, we say what's going to be the equipment that would be proposed, where would the siting be, how would you maintain it, and how would you assure that the results that you get are of good quality. So there's a quality assurance, quality control element that we would expect to see in the plan. Similarly with the community monitoring, again, about equipment and siting, how would they maintain, and what would be your quality assurance. But then, when you're gathering all this information, what do you do with it? What's its point? What's its goal? And that's why it's really important that the public information process also be outlined in the plan. That's basically for the method that would be proposed to disseminate that information. And then there has been an interest in an independent oversight, so some kind of way by which a third party or an audit could come in to ensure that that's quality data. So again, 1 year after rule adoption, refineries submit a plan to our executive officer for approval. In that plan, this is kind of more the detailed information. We would expect that we would see the type of equipment being used on both of those monitoring systems. Again, siting and equipment specifications, also wind measurements, which is really important because if a leak is to end up being detected, you need to know what the real-time wind and wind speed and direction, because that's how you sort of tie back to where a potential leak or an area of the leak might be occurring. We want to see procedures on which that equipment then is being maintained, and if there's shortfalls and how to deal with failures of that equipment. Procedures on quality assurance. Again, any data is no good unless it can be assured that it is actually being checked and that the equipment is calibrated and blah, blah, blah. So that's all really important. And again, independent oversight. So the plan we would expect to see all those elements in the plan. The plan is also, as again, we kind of listed all these out here, but I think the other important element is this idea of continuous dissemination. When we talk about that, we say things like the obvious one is you come up with a sort of a spreadsheet system that could be then placed online and that people can see quickly, can understand what they're really looking at, give it some context. But also, is there other options out there? For example, like on our last working group meeting, it was I thought a real robust discussion about when do you just sort of provide the information and when do you maybe alert or notify the public? And I thought that was really a good exercise because it made us start thinking, well, maybe the best way to sort of put that. And again, we expect this all to be fleshed out in the plans for each individual refinery. But the idea that, we would say, okay, as a member of the public, are you interested in being alerted to toxics? Or are you interested in alerting to, maybe just an emergency situation that would occur at the facility? And that would allow us a process by which we would then, again, disseminate that information. Would they be interested in getting a text message about it or an email or, just be alerted to visit the website where more of that information would be found? So I think all of that stuff needs to, be fleshed out. But one of our, overarching goals in all of this, there could be two ways you can handle this kind of rule. You can either, write something that's really sort of, prescriptive. Some might call it draconian. But there's other ways in which you do it, by which you create a plan environment. So giving flexibility and options for those refineries to come up with what they believe might be their best way in creating this system and providing that information, but making it also useful for them as well. It's going to be really important for them as part of their leak and detection systems to identify those and make corrections where needed. Okay, so the other issue, some of the other things we were thinking about was, what about refineries that are kind of close together, that they share a community? Well, why don't we allow then for like a joint community air monitoring plan? And then there's another thought about, we talk about passive monitors, we talk about open plan. What about the future? Where about it's some kind of emerging technology, and maybe there's something else that the refiners would be interested in using that would work better for their setup. Okay, so we also added in the rule, we know when you're updating your plan, you always want to think ahead if someone wants to update the plan, if there's something that's going on. So we kind of set up a structure here on what we think some deadlines would be, if whether you have, an unplanned event or a planned event, or if you're receiving new information, we kind of set out a time frame there. Okay. And then, of course, there's more. You always have these conditions. If you fail to comply with what was placed out in the plan, you do risk a revocation of that plan. And then, of course, if needs to be a new plan, there'll be a time frame for that, as well as a requirement to provide an updated implementation schedule. So the point of having guidelines really is to ensure that the plan is consistent, and so. And that those are certain elements that are being sought out in the plan. And I almost feel like a broken record as we kind of go through all these things, seeking, maybe what kind of pollutants. For example, we give a suggestive list that we believe is important to be monitored both on the fence line and the community. However, there might be reasons that a particular refinery says, well, we don't have this, this unit, let's say, or we don't do this particular process that would create this emission, et cetera, and kind of create, make an argument for that. And then, of course, could it modify their requirements accordingly. And, another thing we might have to do is look at, again, if there's the type of technology that's out there, and we say, okay, you want to use this, but we actually think, another type of technology is better, and that kind of conversation, I think, is also really important. And the guidelines, what we're trying to do there is kind of flush all that out and give good descriptives, and if at a minimum, educate, particularly like if you're not the refinery, you may want to learn a little bit more about what would be happening in these plans and what's being expected. And then, of course, data management. It's like one thing to have, again, all this data, but it's important to have a good quality assurance program or procedures, to have quality control before that information does get disseminated, because we don't want to send out any wrong messages. And then, of course, everyone has their own unique way sometimes on how they manage their data. But also developing a website as well. And we were thinking that here at the Air District, we would kind of be almost that clearinghouse for all of those individual ones that people could go to and then learn about the data in their neighborhoods. Okay, so we list out here, I can't even read that. So, but of course that's in the rule and in the guidelines as well. But basically what we're looking at here is all the different types of air pollutants. These are air pollutants that do come from refineries. I know a question was raised at the last working group meeting about Bay Area, and these are similar to the list of ones that the Bay Area looks at as well. These emissions, mind you, this was something else that was being raised, talking about stack emissions. Yes, these are ones that typically are generated out of the refinery. However, what we're looking for, though, when we talk about a fence line monitor or community monitor, is just what gets crossed over that monitor, meaning that if you've got this open path monitor, you're going to be picking up not just potentially stack emissions, I guess, but fugitive emissions as well, or anything else that's going from, could be coming not even from that refinery. So I think it's important that we kind of look at it from that perspective. In saying that, however, we then kind of sort of change the listing a bit on what would be expected out of the fence line versus the community, and we have those check marked there. Okay, so once the plan is approved, then you have a 1-year time frame by which we would expect that we have a complete install and begin the operating of that real-time system. The plan is subject to approval from the executive officer. However, if there happens to be a reason that we don't think the plan should be approved for one reason or another, of course we'd be in conversations with the refinery operator and dealing with that. But overall, we would expect a resubmittal then to address those deficiencies. We really debated on this, on whether you kind of go back and forth and back and forth. There was a suggestion early on to go to the hearing board or something, and that just didn't go very well with the working group. So our feeling was then maybe we just get, when it comes back to our camp, then we either have the executive officer approve it, or we just modify that to the way that we kind of see would be best to be approved. And of course, when we say that, it sounds harsh, but I think what we're trying to do is just ensuring that both sides kind of just sit down and come to the table and get resolution, right? Because otherwise this could just drag on. Notification. So we put this in the rule here because basically we just want to be made aware that if there's any downtime, maybe the system's being maintained or there's some kind of unplanned failure from either one of the systems, whether it's Fenceline or Community, or whether there's a problem with some of the record keeping. We just wanted to be alerted of that, and this was also raised. We had a 2-hour time frame on that to be alerted when there's an issue. So basically, however, and going back and looking at that, so what we're trying to do there is somebody had asked whether that was was the data down for 5 minutes, was it down for 1 hour, et cetera. You have up to a 2-hour time frame. So this is, what we're seeking there is that we understand that what you discover it and you're given 2 hours to try to correct that issue, and that should not be a big, problem. But if it is a big problem, it's going to take longer than the 2 hours. That's when we want to be alerted and notified, so we know how to respond in case someone from the community or the general public, inquires with us. The other thing was raised in the public in the working group meetings, which I think is a good point, was whether they would, the refineries themselves would lead the effort in their neighbor community monitoring systems. And this was something that the Bay Area also had to address. And so what we thought was coming up with this idea of you would be exempt from the rule, at least on the community monitoring elements of the rule, that is, if there's some kind of an agreement. And we wrote in there, cost recoverable agreement. I think this is something that you're seeing in all the legislature write-ups, that the refinery still would have some, economic burden involved in that, but that there could be an agreement where we would then prepare, I say we as in the South Coast AQMD, would prepare and then, basically have this plan where we would install and operate, et cetera, the community system. And we would still be expected to ensure the equipment type and the siting and operation and maintenance and data process, as well as public dissemination. So there was a question of, if we were in charge, would it be any different? And not really. Okay, and we did put that under the exemption section. Now, when we analyze the rule, as you know, we are subject to the California Environmental Quality Act. That's a state law that requires that any project that could have an impact, any project that's being funded or implemented by a government agency or private entity, requires an environmental assessment. There's 17 environmental topic areas. However, in this particular case, we determined that there wasn't any possibility, because it's a monitoring system, a program, that the implementation would have any significant impact on the environment. So therefore, we are going to issue a notice of exemption under CEQA. And under socioeconomic, Elaine, did you want to take the slide, or did you want me to? Okay. All right, I'm going to read it. Sorry. Okay, socioeconomic impact assessment is not legally required for 1180 because it, quote unquote, does not significantly affect air quality or emission limitations. The assessment is being conducted for informational purposes only, so Elaine's going to provide types of affected facilities, some range of probable cost, impacts on employment and the economy. Cost impacts to the affected refineries anticipated to be primarily driven by the capital, which makes sense, for those pieces of equipment, operational and maintenance of both those systems. Okay, so continue on with our process and rule development. This today, of course, is our official public workshop. We are going to be addressing our stationary source committee group. If anybody doesn't know, we have a series of committees that our board members sit on. They're focused on specific topics, whether that's a stationary source or a mobile source or a refinery operation or what have you. And so we're going to take ours to the stationary source next Friday. We are setting in October. That just means it's a 30-day window upon which we can take it to our board for consideration for approval in November. And then in case you're interested, there are our email addresses and phone numbers if you have any more specific questions or discussion you'd like to have. We will be having another working group meeting. Dan, do you want to tell them?
We will have another working group meeting that's tentatively scheduled for September 19th, so approximately 2 weeks. The focus of that working group meeting will be we'll primarily be focusing both on the guidelines and, of course, some minor rule revisions that we need to take a second look at.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dan. All right, and again, those who are happen to be on the webcast, we're going to put that email address back up again. If you wanted to submit any questions to the panel, you can do that. In the meantime, what we'll do is we'll open it up to the floor for anyone who wants to come up and comment. There are no limitations on the time to comment. Of course, we hope your comments are germane and constructive, and which I'm sure they will be. And just make sure you identify your name and organization for the public record, and that's it. Thank you very much. Okay, first one up. Oh, Bridget.
Let's see. I'm Bridget McCann. I'm manager of the Western States Petroleum Association for Southern California region. WISPA, we appreciate the opportunity to comment further on proposed Rule 1180, refinery fenceline community monitoring. WISPA supports the use of demonstrated measurement technologies to provide refineries with additional information for achieving additional emissions reductions. We've also been supportive of the district's pilot studies for different emerging optical remote sensing measurement technologies, and we continue to advocate the capabilities of ORS technologies be verified to ensure they are deployed and results used in an appropriate manner. The stated purpose of proposed Rule 1180 is, quote, to require fence line and community air monitoring systems that provide continuous air quality information to the public about levels of various criteria air pollutants, volatile organic compounds, metals, and other compounds at or near property boundaries of petroleum refineries and in nearby communities. The scope of the proposed rule, the pollutant species monitored, and the corresponding draft monitoring guidelines should match the stated purpose of the rule. The rule should also focus on pollutant species actually found in refinery emissions and how to provide refinery monitoring program information to the public in an effective and educational manner. Alert notifications are beyond the scope of this rulemaking. Attempting to include a requirement for them in PR 1180 is likely to create conflicts with other regulatory and legislative activities that are currently addressing such topics. As stated in the fourth working group, WISPA believes that there should be at least 2 more working groups. One it appears you've already scheduled, so thank you for that. The first to discuss the draft monitoring guidelines due to their public release that was only 1 business day prior to the last working group. And then the second meeting with affected CUPAs to discuss the implications of the proposed draft monitoring guidelines and the public notification requirements. WISPA will also be providing additional written comments to the AQMD on the draft rule, and in particular the guidelines where more specificity is needed, such as required radius for community monitoring. We'd also like to suggest that with so much discussion yet to be had with the working group, that the date of the adoption hearing be delayed from the November date to a later time. We thank you for consideration.
Great, thank you, Bridget. Yes, I agree. We need a couple things there. So definitely when it comes to the guidelines, we hear you. I think when we first released those, our thought was, okay, we're just creating this general guidance, document, this bubble that we can allow that a level of flexibility. Clearly, the working group definitely wants some more prescription in there, so we've been working on that. So we'll get those guys out. We'll get that out to you. When it comes to notification, we did go back and took a look at that section, and I don't think the intent was really kind of the way we sort of put that. We don't want to be in conflict with other alert systems. They're in place, and they need to stay in place. I mean, and we really don't want to also be necessarily the alert agency either, right? Our only thought on that when it comes to, quote unquote notification, we work with the refineries on that, again, in each of their plans. But again, it was one of those by which I believe Florence DeBurian mentioned at the last working group meeting, which was really, community just wants to know if there's an emergency situation, we want to, know what that is. And I think if that's really the case, then we just let those systems, like the Torrance Fire Department, for example, has a system already in place by which they're making those proper notifications. And again, we don't want to conflict or be in conflict again with those existing systems. So we're gonna update the guidelines, hopefully be clear, and kind of back off a bit on that, your concern there. So thank you for bringing that up.
Bridget and the rest of the audience, I do want to make one point of clarification, and that is that for the next working group meeting, we have not yet scheduled that. It's just tentative. We're planning on sending that notice out either later today or early tomorrow morning. So in case you did not receive notice, it's because we haven't sent it out. It will go out either first thing tomorrow morning or possibly later today.
Hey, Bill.
Hi, Bill Quinn with SEEB. Good afternoon, and I just wanted to make a few points. Some of these Bridget already covered, but I think as far as the monitoring, we think at this point it would work best, and a lot of this depends on the guidelines, so we're glad to hear you're focusing on that, but it would work best for all community monitoring to be done by the district. We think there might be a more stronger trust of the information if it comes from the district. And also it would fit better when you try and incorporate the requirements of AB 617, which is going to be a huge thing for all of us, we know. But that coordination of what you're doing now and what's under 617, I think is terribly important. Again, the focus there is the guidelines, they need to be cost effective and all that. So we're anxious to work with you on that. As far as funding the community monitoring, we have a suggestion. You might want to take a look at what's called Schedule 10 in the Bay Area. It's a schedule that looks at the similar type of funding, and it might be something that would work for you down here. So it's a recommendation. I think you've talked about a lot about already the notification systems. Our message here is work with the emergency responders. You have an established group of folks out there who are very aware of how to deal with emergency situations. The CUPAs are a very active group. We work with the CUPAs. We'd be happy to facilitate any type of meetings with them. But the emergency responders are the go-to folks for this type of thing. So we encourage you to work with them on any type of public notification. So thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bill. Okay, we got an email. So let me see if I gotta read this. It's a little bit long, so maybe I'll just try to read quickly. All right, so this is from Ashley Hernandez, a Wilmington resident and youth organizer for the Communities for a Better Environment. Thanks so much for the important work. Much better refinery monitoring is very important to the Wilmington community members who suffer from many health impacts caused to be known and made worse by oil refineries. In general, please ensure that the regulations clearly require that refineries are required to detect spike in emissions and can't rely on longer averaging times, and also require complete spatial coverage to detect not only plumes at the ground level, but also from high stacks. We need to ensure community access to emissions data and also on the cause of releases. This should not be considered confidential. We also want to make sure that you require monitoring a full set of harmful chemicals that are emitted in significant levels. The slideshow shows only 2 sulfur compounds, but there's a number of other sulfur compounds being emitted. Then they give an example of one of the reports. We urge you to double check the inventory and other databases to make sure the chemicals the refiners are emitting or in significant quantities are required to be monitored, and that you have a system to detect the unknown chemicals. Some other issues that Ashley raises that are important as backup to maybe possibly look at video monitoring, also include independent mobile monitoring systems, and require the plans be updated every 2 years with public input. So, and look forward to the next working group meeting. So I didn't mean to cut the email short, Ashley, but I just want to make sure everyone has time, and we'll submit that into the record. Thank you. Okay, more comments? So we don't have a date yet for the next working group.
We do.
meeting.
Yeah, we do September 19th. It's
Okay,
just that we-
but you haven't sent out the email yet?
Right.
Okay, so everyone
We
look
didn't-
forward
we
to
didn't
that
wanna
email?
cause confusion.
That would be here at the district.
Well, there was a couple of things on that September 19th date. First of all, we didn't want to send it out before this workshop because I didn't want to create any confusion. And then second of all, I did receive a request earlier today from CBE regarding having a community-based workshop. What I told them was that, I would obviously take that to management and let them consider that as an option. They were just hoping that we could hold one working group, in the community if possible. So that was a comment that I received by email about an hour before the working group meeting.
Okay, but we'll send out that email with all that information. Okay. All right, well, if we don't have any more comments now, everyone can still submit emails, letters, et cetera, to us as we can continue this process. We really do appreciate the active attendance at our working group meetings, and also the really thoughtful comments, I think, that are being provided to us. This has been a really good, constructive process so far. So I guess that concludes our public workshop. Thank you for spending the afternoon with us, and we'll see you next time.